See global power.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching Eagle News International. Good evening, CJ.
Good evening, Alma, and to everyone joining the broadcast. Here are the headlines.
Nigeria's National Public Health Institute said today that the country has detected its first case of the Omicron coronavirus variant in a sample it collected back in October.
Japan suspended all new flight bookings into the country from Wednesday in response to Omicron.
At least 3 students were killed after a shooting at their high school in southeastern Michigan.
And the OECD lowered the world's economic growth outlook for 2021 and called for a swifter rollout of COVID vaccines, fearing the emergence of breeding grounds for deadlier strains.
First in our news, Nigeria's National Public Health Institute said today that the country has already detected its first case of the Omicron coronavirus variant in a sample it collected back in October, weeks even before South Africa alerted the world about the variant last week. The Nigeria Center for Disease Control said in a statement and issued by its Director General that genomic sequencing of positive cases of COVID-19 in the country identified 2 cases of the variant Omicron among travelers from South Africa. And the 2 unidentified travelers arrived in the West African country last week. But the variant has also been confirmed in cases in Nigeria prior to their arrival. According to an Associated Press report, Nigeria CDC Director General Dr. Ifedayo Adetiva said that retrospective sequencing of the previously confirmed cases among travelers to Nigeria also identified the Omicron variant among the sample collected October this year. The Nigeria CDC urged the country's states and the general public to be on alert and called for improved testing amid concerns that Nigeria's low testing capacity might become its biggest challenge in the face of Omicron.
The Omicron coronavirus variant was present in Europe before the first case were reported in South Africa. New data from the Netherlands showed that on Tuesday, as Latin America reported its first 2 cases in Brazil. RIVM Infectious Diseases Chief Ora Tijmen says situation in the Netherlands is not an exceptional situation or exceptional risk at this point. Take a look.
So following the ban on in-flights coming from the South African countries, the Netherlands tested people coming in with 2 flights on Friday, 26th. And upon testing, we found that 14 passengers were infected with this Omicron variant. The second finding is that we asked a few laboratories who perform the S-dropout PCR on a regular basis to send some of their strains to the Netherlands in order to the RIVM in order to sequence them, and we did that, and from this exercise we found 2 additional cases of Omicron variant which have been sampled on the 19th and the 23rd of November. So is this exceptional? I don't think so. I think that many countries, if they look back into probably the sequences that I have, they will find that there are some Omicron variants in people who came from these regions where the infections are spread. Yeah, we have the biggest number because we tested 2 airplanes. So I'm not sure what would happen if other countries would do the same. So probably they will have the same findings. The issue is that at the moment a new variant emerges and is announced. Probably the spread is already, or the variant is already spread all over the world. I mean, in the way these variants of the coronavirus spread, there is no way you can stop a variant from spreading globally.
Meanwhile, Japan suspended all new flight bookings into their country from today in response to Omicron, ignoring a World Health Organization warning against blanket travel bans as the new coronavirus strain spread further around the world. Japan confirmed its first Omicron case on Tuesday, and it had already tightened its tough COVID border measures. Japanese authorities on Wednesday announced they had detected a second infection of the new strain in an arriving traveler, and this time in a person arriving from Peru. Japan's borders have been virtually sealed throughout most of the pandemic, with even residents barred from entry for part of 2020. The border measures have been a key part of the country's COVID response, which hasn't involved the tough lockdown seen in some parts of the world. After a summer surge in cases, Japan is registering only double-digit infections nationwide most days and has logged around 18,360 deaths during the pandemic. Around 77% of the country's population is now fully vaccinated, and booster shots began being administered today to people who received their second dose at least 8 months ago.
Meanwhile, Sweden's chief epidemiologist Anders Tegnell told a local news agency he does not believe that a travel ban would have any major effect other than for countries with direct flights to the affected areas. He said regarding the measures that Sweden is currently taking against the virus that they have worked in the past, and so far, he said he does not see any reason why it should not work in other times. Take a look.
Sure, we need to keep tracks of it, and now I think we're up to 2 or 3 cases in Sweden, and we see cases coming in many other countries. So it's quite likely that's going to be a variant that we have to take into account. If it's very different from the previous variants, that remains to be seen. And if that means that we need to do anything else than we're doing right now. But the plans we have in place takes into account that variants might turn up. So it does not really change our analysis or predictions very much. We don't know yet. I mean, we made some scenarios, and according to those, we do see an increase, as we see now. But that increase will not be that dramatic, and especially the pressure on the healthcare services should not be that big. So we still hope that we can keep to those scenarios that we have built, and that will be the way it's going to be. So I think when it comes to effect of measures, the effect of the Swedish measures were not that different to the effects of measures in many other countries. We could do it with less of hard regulations, more of advice, but that's more the way the legal system is built in Sweden and the way we are by tradition working with public health. So I think the differences are overestimated to a great extent. Sweden tried to take care of this pandemic in many ways, in similar ways, like many other countries. And right now, if you look at the end results and look at the different EU countries, I mean, Sweden is not really very different than most countries. I mean, our death toll, number of cases and so on are very similar to some kind of European average. Yeah, because it has worked in the past. And so far, we don't see any reason why it shouldn't work another time. There will most likely be a wave, but this time, the big difference this time is that we have so big proportions of our population vaccinated. So we really do believe that the pressure on the healthcare services will be much smaller this time, even if we have more cases than we have today.
In the Philippines, WHO Country Representative Dr. Rabindra Abeyasinghe said it would be good to focus on samples of people who tested positive in points of entries during the last 10 days or 2 weeks to determine if the new COVID-19 variant of concern, the Omicron, has entered the Philippines. Take a look.
I think we need to do whole genome sequencing now, and what is important from a genome sequencing perspective is because of the recent detection of the variant, we need to rapidly do genome sequencing of the most recent arrivals. There is a tendency and a delay in the Philippines to be sequencing samples that are 4 to 6 weeks collected earlier. Right now, I think the importance is to focus on those samples of people who detected positive points of entry or recent arrivals during the last 10 days or 2 weeks, because the likelihood of detecting the Omicron virus will be higher. We need to be aware of the fact that many countries have limited capacity for whole genome sequencing, and that's why I'm advocating that any returning traveler overseas should be sequenced as a priority so that we get a head start on being able to detect the arrival of the variant in the country.
The WHO official also expressed his support for the country's national vaccination days, as this will help protect more people against the deadly disease. Abeyasinga then urged the government to implement crowd control as well as to increase the vaccination capacity. He also reiterated to the public that wearing of face masks and practicing social distancing was still needed to fight against COVID-19.
The WHO said Tuesday that those not fully vaccinated against COVID-19 who are also vulnerable to the disease, including over 60s, should put off travel to areas with community transmission. The World Health Organization also said blanket travel bans would not stop the spread of the Omicron variant. The new COVID-19 variant of concern, which the WHO says poses a very high risk globally, has prompted many countries to shut their borders. Blanket travel bans will not prevent the international spread, and they place a heavy burden on lives and livelihoods. That according to the WHO in a travel advice statement on Omicron. In addition, they can adversely impact global health efforts during a pandemic by disincentivizing countries to report and share epidemiological and sequencing data.
Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia has just recorded the Gulf's first confirmed case of Omicron variant of the coronavirus in a citizen returning from North Africa, according to a health ministry official today. The ministry official told the state Spanish news agency that, quote, one case of the Omicron variant has been detected in the kingdom. It was a citizen coming from a North African country. And Saudi Arabia last week halted flights from 7 southern African countries, mirroring similar moves by other governments, but travel links with North Africa have remained unaffected. The kingdom had been lifting some of the remaining restrictions it imposed early in the pandemic. Since the pandemic started, Saudi Arabia has recorded 549,000 cases of COVID-19, 8,836 of them fatal.
And now here are some images of coronavirus testing in South Korea's capital, Seoul. As locals say, they are really worried over a surge in cases that topped 5,000 today, according to the Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency. Take a look.
저기 오미크론 발생한 지역에서는 차단 아예 공항 자체에 출입이 안 되게 그렇게 막았으면 좋겠어요.
요즘에 이제 주변에서도 확진된 사람도 있고 이렇게 하니까 이제 이렇게 확진된 사람이 많다 보니까 주변에서도 나오고 좀 걱정되는 부분이 좀 많습니다.
According to an Associated Press report, the Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency said most of the new 5,123 cases reported came from the capital Seoul and its surrounding metropolitan region, where officials earlier said more than 80% of intensive care units designated for COVID-19 patients were already occupied. The KDCA also said health workers are conducting genetic sequencing tests on a couple who arrived from Nigeria to determine whether they have been affected or infected with the new coronavirus variant Omicron. The country has yet to confirm a case of Omicron, which is seen as potentially more infectious than previous strains of the virus.
And this just in, World Health Organization member states agreed today to start building a new international accord on how to handle future pandemics and ensure there can be no repeat of COVID-19. The economic turmoil and millions of lives lost during the coronavirus crisis triggered calls for new international defenses strong enough to prevent a future such disaster.
Je ne vois pas d'objection. La décision est donc adoptée.
Reiterate that the decision we just took is a win for all of us, for multilateralism and global health, but will require goodwill from all of us for its swift implementation. We have given the world a signal that we can commit to action. The decision sets up a clear path, but at the same time provides for flexibility if deemed necessary. The European Union, we will engage with all member states to develop a new legally binding pandemic agreement that complements the international health regulations and other existing mechanisms to provide the world with a more coherent global health architecture.
At a special meeting in Geneva, the 194 WHO member states unanimously adopted a resolution launching the negotiating and drafting process for a new international instrument on pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response. The process will present its final outcome to WHO member states in 2024. The body's first meeting must be no later than March 1 next year to elect 2 co-chairs and 4 vice chairs.
A volcano northwest of the Philippine capital, Manila, erupted Tuesday, according to authorities, adding there were no reports of ashfall, but warning people to stay away as they reviewed the alert level. The eruption at Mount Pinatubo was a phreatic one, an explosion driven by steam that happens when water above or below ground is heated by magma, lava, or hot rocks, and was recorded at around midday local time, according to the nation's seismological agency. The event was likely driven by shallow hydrothermal process beneath the edifice, according to the agency in a statement. The confirmation came after an earlier bulletin in which the agency had described the explosion as weak and suggested it may have been caused by other potential sources, including ordnance disposal. Now, the most powerful volcanic explosion in the Philippines in recent years was the 1991 eruption of the same Mount Pinatubo, about 100 kilometers from Manila, which killed more than 800 people. The last phreatic eruption recorded at the volcano was in 1992, according to the agency's data. Its current alert level 0 status was under consideration, pending the results of data processing.
Meanwhile, the main cone of the Cumbre Vieja volcano, which is erupting in the Canary Islands, emits ash once again after several hours of interruption. Now, this phenomenon has already occurred twice during the eruptive process that began on September 19. And most of the island of around 85,000 people, part of the Canary Islands archipelago of northwestern Africa, has been unaffected by the eruption, with the lava flow concentrated on the western side. The molten rock has already covered 1,065 hectares and destroyed nearly 1,500 buildings, mainly homes, according to the Copernicus, the European Union Satellite Monitoring Service.
In other news, Google will stop carrying election ads in the Philippines ahead of the May 2022 presidential vote. The internet giant said that Wednesday, similar to action it has taken in the United States. Alarm has been raised in recent years by governments and election watchdogs over the use of targeted political advertising, especially disinformation campaigns to sway voters. The updated policy goes into effect on February 8th, covering ads on Google, YouTube, and its other platforms, including shopping. Google is focusing its efforts and resources on upcoming election-related initiatives, which aim to help people access useful and accurate information via product features and media literacy programs, encourage participation in the voting process, and help protect the integrity of the elections. It said that in a statement. The Philippines Commission on Elections said in a statement that the Google announcement was in line with a law that prohibits political advertising ahead of the campaign period for the May 9 vote. Campaigning starts on February 8 for presidential and Senate polls and March 25 for all other posts.
And the news continues here on Eagle News. CJ and I will be back right after this.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Ating pong lipunan, hindi na mawawala ang mga samot-saring problema. Kaya tuloy lamang po ang pag-aksyon, paghahanap ng solusyon. Lalo na ngayon, may maaasahan ka ng re-responde. Sabado, alas 6 hanggang alas 7 ng gabi. Ito ang Responde, Mata ng Mamamayan.
Welcome back. To the U.S. now. At least 3 students were killed after a shooting at their high school in southeastern Michigan. Police say a 15-year-old student opened fire at his Michigan high school on Tuesday, killing 3 teenagers, wounding 8 other people before surrendering to police in what was the deadliest U.S. school shooting so far this year. Let's listen in.
In charge of the office. It's unfortunate I have to report that we have 3 deceased victims right now who are all believed to be students. We have 6 others that were shot. 1 was a school teacher. They're all at local hospitals being treated for various injuries. It's a 15-year-old student who was a sophomore at the high school. He did not give us any resistance when he was taken into custody. He's currently being transported back to Pontiac for potential, he's already invoked his right to not speak. So he wants an attorney. He's not telling us anything at this point in time. It's a very tragic situation, obviously. Around 12:51 today, we received a 911 call of an active shooter at the high school. Deputies immediately responded, and we received over 100 911 calls into our dispatch center, over 100. The deputies took a suspect into custody within 5 minutes of the original 911 call.
Now, the sheriff's office said the dead were a 16-year-old male, a 14-year-old female, and a 17-year-old female. Of the wounded, 6 were in stable condition and 2 were undergoing surgery. The suspect was taken into custody and a semi-automatic handgun was seized. But there was no immediate explanation for what might have prompted the attack in Oxford, a small town about 40 miles north of Detroit. According to the Independent site, the Oxford school shooter knocked on doors, pretending to be a sheriff to try and lure students out of classrooms, according to a parent. Fox News in Detroit, meanwhile, was told that the gunman was saying he was with the sheriff's office, while the parent added that her son was barricaded under a desk during this incident. Police received more than 100 911 emergency calls shortly after noon, and that the shooter unleashed 15 to 20 shots over about 5 minutes. The suspect was taken into custody within 5 minutes of the first 911 call. President Joe Biden was informed of the shooting during a visit to Minnesota. Let's listen in.
Learned about a school shooting in Michigan. We learned, as we learned the full details, my heart goes out to the families enduring the unimaginable grief of losing a loved one. And the young man, I think, as I understand it from staff, is about 15 years old, and he turned himself in, and just said he claimed his right against self-incrimination and handed over his pistol. That's all we know about it, but you've got to know that that whole community has to be just in a state of shock right now.
It was the deadliest school shooting so far this year, according to Everytown for Gun Safety, a group which keeps statistics of mass shootings and lobbies for gun control. Before Tuesday's incident, there had been 138 shootings in schools across the U.S. in 2021, according to figures provided by Everytown. In those incidents, 26 resulted in fatalities, though no more than 2 each time.
In other news, Moscow said that Ukraine has massed tens of thousands of troops in the country's east, where Kyiv is fighting pro-Russian separatists, as worries grow over an escalation in the long-simmering conflict. Kyiv's Western allies last month began raising the alarm over a fresh Russian troop buildup around Ukraine's borders and warned of a possible winter invasion. The Kremlin has denied the claims and blamed the escalation intentions on the West supplying Ukraine with modern weaponry, conducting drills in the Black Sea, and flying bombers near Russia's borders. Take a look.
Вооруженные силы Украины наращивают военную силу, стягивают тяжелую технику, личный состав. По некоторым данным, численность группировки войск Украины в зоне конфликта уже достигает 125 тысяч человек. А это...
The comments followed the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry saying Tuesday that Russia has massed 115,000 troops around Ukraine on the Crimean Peninsula, which Moscow annexed in 2014, and in two eastern regions occupied by the breakaway fighters. Kyiv and its Western allies have long accused Russia of sending troops and arms to support the separatists, claims Moscow denies, who seized the territory shortly after Russia annexed Crimea. The conflict, which has claimed more than 13,000 lives, escalated at the beginning of the year and saw Russia deploy around 100,000 troops around Ukraine's border spring.
Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky today called for direct talks with Moscow as tensions mounted over claims that Russia is laying the groundwork for an invasion. Again, let's listen in.
Повинні сказати правду, що ми не зможемо зупинити війну без прямих перемовин з Росією.
Now, Zelensky's call came as NATO looks to counter what it says is a buildup of Russian troops on the border with Ukraine, with U.S. diplomatic chief Antony Blinken set to meet his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, in Stockholm on Thursday. Kiev's Western allies have since last month warned of a fresh Russian troop buildup around Ukraine's borders and a possible winter invasion. The alleged surge follows a similar buildup in the spring when Russia gathered around 100,000 troops on Ukraine's borders but later announced a drawdown. Russian officials in turn have accused Kyiv of massing tens of thousands of troops near separatist-controlled territory.
NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says on his arrival at a meeting of NATO foreign ministers that Russia will pay a high price if it uses force against Ukraine again. Western countries spearheaded by the U.S. worry that Moscow could be planning an incursion into Ukraine after accusing the Kremlin of massing tens of thousands of troops and heavy armor close to the frontier. Russian President Vladimir Putin said Tuesday military exercises and other moves by the West and Ukraine threaten Russia's security, warning against crossing the Kremlin's red lines. Take a look.
Times now, there will be a high price to pay for Russia if they once again use force against the independent sovereign nation Ukraine. We have demonstrated our ability to impose costs, economic, political actions.
Смотрите, о возможном вводе российских войск на Украину говорили еще в начале года. Мы проводили учения «Запад-21», но, как видим, этого не случилось. Дело не в том, чтобы вводить там войска, не вводить, воевать, не воевать, а дело в том, чтобы наладить отношения по созданию более справедливого, устойчивого развития и учета интересов в области безопасности всех участников международной деятельности. Вот если мы будем искренне к этому стремиться, то никаких угроз никто не будет испытывать.
Top diplomats from the U.S.-led alliance met in Latvia's capital, Riga, looking to deter a Russian incursion as fears have grown after accusations Moscow has massed tens of thousands of troops and heavy weapons on its neighbors' borders. NATO diplomats say the bloc remains uncertain of Putin's intentions this time round, but ministers were discussing contingency plans should Russia invade.
Tens of thousands of protesters turned out in Sudan in the latest demonstrations against last month's military coup. Sudanese security forces fired tear gas at the protesters rallying against last month's military takeover and a subsequent deal that reinstated the prime minister. Sudan's top general Abdel Fattah al-Burhan seized power and detained Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok on October 25. But after international condemnation and mass protests, he reinstated the premier nearly a month later. Critics, however, have lambasted the November 21 agreement as whitewashing and accused Hamdok of betrayal, with pro-democracy activists vowing to maintain pressure on the military-civilian authority. At least 43 people have been killed in anti-coup protests since last month, according to medics.
Barbados just became a republic after nearly 400 years of allegiance to Britain. Take a look.
The time has come to fully leave our colonial past behind. Barbadians want a Barbadian head of state. This is the ultimate statement of confidence in who we are and what we are capable of achieving. Hence, Barbados will take the next logical step. Whether fair or foul winds come our way, Vessel Republic Barbados has set sail on her maiden voyage.
Simultaneously, as the all colors are marched off the parade, the Queen's standard is lowered.
I was born and grew up in the time of colonialism and witnessed Barbados's independence. I am part of the bridge generation from the colonial past to the independent nation to the future of the new republic. Today, I am both proud and humbled.
Ladies and gentlemen, Her Excellency Dame Sandra Prunella Mason, President of Barbados.
From the darkest days of our past and the appalling atrocity of slavery, which forever stains our history, the people of this island forged their path with extraordinary fortitude.
On behalf of a grateful nation, but an even prouder people, we therefore present to you the designee for National Hero of Barbados, Ambassador Robin Rihanna Fenty. May you continue to shine like a diamond and bring honor to your nation.
Barbadians are known to be resilient people. We're known to do what we have to do in times of plenty and in times of need. And I think that that's where we are at today, where we are saying with confidence that we can move forward on our own.
In other news, Alice Sebold, author of the best-selling novel The Lovely Bones, on Tuesday apologized to a black man who spent 16 years in prison for her 1981 rape, only to see his conviction overturned last week. I want to say that I am truly sorry to Anthony Broadwater, and I deeply regret what you have been through, according to Sebold, whose breakthrough book, Lucky, described her traumatic assault at age 18. I am sorry most of all for the fact that the life you could have led was unjustly robbed from you. And I know that no apology can change what happened to you and never will, Sebold, now 58, said in a statement. Broadwater, 61, had always maintained his innocence, but was convicted in 1982 of the rape and spent 16 years behind bars. Shortly after his release, Lucky came out in 1999, a memoir in which Sebold described the brutal attack she suffered as a first-year student at Syracuse University in New York State. Sebold, whose bestseller, The Lovely Bones, also dealt with the issue of sexual assault, said she was grateful that Mr. Broadwater has finally been vindicated. But she added the fact remains that 40 years ago, he became another young black man brutalized by our flawed legal system. She said, I will forever be sorry for what was done to him. 5 months after Sebold reported the rape to the police, Broadwater was arrested after she passed him on the street and identified him as the possible attacker, according to U.S. media.
Eagle News will be back with more stories. Please don't go away.
Alam namin ang iyong pagsisikap. Dama namin ang iyong mga sakripisyo. Kita namin ang pagharap mo sa bawat pagsubok. Kaya sa kabila ng mga hamon ng buhay, nandito kami para umalalay. Kasi katulad mo, gusto rin namin ang magandang bukas para sa kanya. Hatid namin ang dekalidad na edukasyon at makabagong pasilidad sa abot kayang halaga. Kaya huwag ka na mangamba. Sasamahan ka namin tuparin ang mga pangarap niya. Maaasahan mong sulit dito ang mga pinagsikapan mo. Sa aming mga makabagong pasilidad at sistema ng edukasyon. Mailalabas natin ang angking talino at mga kakayahan niya. Kahit sa munting halaga, makakasiguro ka na makakasabay siya sa mabilis na pag-ikot ng mundo. Sa New Era, karamay mo kami sa bawat hamon. Kaagapay mo kami sa bawat hakbang. Kasama mo kami sa bawat ngiti at tagumpay.
Kahit ano pang trip nyo, sasakyan namin yan.
It was at this moment that he knew.
Ganito raw mag-drive ang pogi.
Pag na-shoot to, mag-move on ako sa'yo. Walang mag-move on.
Mag-enjoy din kayong makilaro sa ating Game of the Day.
Happy yarn.
Basta talaga friends na nakikita sa internet, ginagaya. Gayang-gaya.
Naman naman doon sa computer. Tapos naka-aircon ka pa. Ay naku, laki-laki na din natin.
Funniest Nakaball Videos.
Malalayong lugar ang kanilang narating para maghanap buhay. Tulungan ang pamilyang iniwan sa sariling bayan. Yan ang ating mga overseas Filipino worker. Pero dahil sa di pangkaraniwang pangyayaring hatid ay krisis, may ilan sa kanilang nagpasyang umuwi. Pinagyaman ang sariling lupain, nagtayo ng negosyo na kasama sa puhunan ang sipag at tiyaga. Ang mga OFW, maraming sakripisyo, ninanais maging kapaki-pakinabang maging sa kanilang pagbabalik bansa. Sapagkat ang ating mga bagong bayani, Pilipino pa rin sa puso at damdamin.
Welcome back to the news. The OECD lowered the world's economic growth outlook for 2021 today and called for a swifter rollout of COVID vaccines, fearing the emergence of breeding grounds for deadlier strains. The global economy is now expected to expand by 5.6% this year, down from an earlier forecast of 5.7%. The OECD said that in its updated economic outlook released as the Omicron variant has sparked concerns about its impact on the recovery. The global recovery continues to progress, but has lost momentum and is becoming increasingly imbalanced, said the Paris-based Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. While the OECD said it was cautiously optimistic about the recovery, it warned that health, high inflation, supply chain bottlenecks, and potential policy missteps are all key concerns. The OECD said the top policy priority remains the need to ensure that vaccines are produced and deployed as quickly as possible throughout the world, including booster doses. It said the recovery will remain precarious and uncertain in all countries until this is achieved. While the outlook was lower this year, the OECD's growth forecast for 2022 remains unchanged at 4.5%. The report does not take into account the possible impact of the Omicron variant.
Pandemic-induced lockdowns caused Australia's economy to shrink 1.9% in the third quarter, a downturn that bucked the trend of a steady recovery in other wealthy nations. The Australian Bureau of Statistics today reported the country's second quarterly contraction since the pandemic began, and one of the largest contractions on record, sparked by long-running containment measures in populous states. Sydney, Melbourne, and Canberra were all closed for chunks of the quarter, causing households to spend dramatically less on services. There was a 21% drop in spending on hotels, cafes, and restaurants, and a 40% drop in spending on transport. The downturn was out of step with other major economies such as Canada, India, Japan, the US, and the Eurozone, which all saw growth during the period as they reopened for business. Economists had forecast a 2.8% contraction, but increased exports appear to have come to the rescue, buoyed by high coal and gas prices. The economy is widely expected to bounce back in the final quarter of the year.
Tel Aviv is the world's most expensive city to live in, as soaring inflation has pushed up living costs globally, according to a survey published today. The Israeli city climbed 5 rungs to score top place for the first time in the authoritative ranking compiled by the Economist Intelligence Unit, or EIU. The worldwide cost of living index is compiled by comparing prices in US dollars for goods and services in 173 cities. Tel Aviv climbed the rankings partly due to the strength of the national currency, the shekel, against the dollar, as well increases in prices for transport and groceries. Paris and Singapore came joint second, followed by Zurich and Hong Kong. New York was in 6th, with Geneva in 7th. Rounding off the top 10 were Copenhagen in 8th, Los Angeles in 9th, and Osaka in Japan in 10th. Last year, the survey put Paris, Zurich, and Hong Kong in joint first place. This year's data was collected in August and September as prices for freight and commodities rose, and shows that on average prices rose 3.5% in local currency terms, the fastest inflation rate recorded over the past 5 years.
And the news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be right back.
Enjoy your favorite OPM hits as we play them on air and online. From music videos,
Yeah, we gonna go up. Ibibigay ko ang aking puso. Sa iyong tingin pa lang ako ay natunaw na.
to entertaining live and home performances of your favorite Pinoy artists.
Now every step we take, boundary we break. There's nothing we can do.
Pakinggan mo ang aking sigaw sa dilaw ng buwan.
Mag-hashtag Soundtrip and Chill kasama ang barkada, ang Letters and Music, Saturday and Sunday, 1 p.m. only on Net 25.
And finally, in our news, the American Dictionary of Reference, Merriam-Webster, revealed that vaccine to be its word of the year for 2021, reflecting both the hopes and deep divisions sparked by vaccination as the world wrestled with year 2 of COVID-19 pandemic. The word vaccine was about much more than medicine in 2021. The dictionary, which based its decision on surging interest in the term's definition, said in its post on its website. For many, it said the word symbolized a possible return to the lives we led before the pandemic. But it was also at the center of debates about personal choice, political affiliation, professional regulations, school safety, healthcare, inequality, and so much more. Merriam-Webster said the development of messenger RNA or mRNA vaccines required it to expand its definition of the word vaccine because the technology triggers an immune response by telling human cells to create antigens versus classic vaccines, which inject a neutralized form of a virus or antigens. The word vaccine saw a 601% increase in definition lookups over the year compared to 2020. Word of the
Sign
year.
of the times.
Yes.
And that's it for tonight's broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I am CJ Hero. The news continues tomorrow.
And at the end of the day, there remains so much more to be grateful for. We'll see you back tomorrow. And before we go, I would like to greet Ma'am Babylin Manalo. A very happy birthday po.
Hey, happy birthday. May you have a good one.
Happy birthday po. And then with that, thank you for joining us. We live
in interesting times.
This program is supported by SMC Global Power,